it is my honor to introduce you to our guest teacher this morning, Mr. Steen Metz. Sometimes as a teacher, I like to kid myself and believe my students are going to remember all of my classes. In reality, many of your classes become distant memories. Today is different. Today, we will learn something profound about humanity, the power of identity, the value of human life, and the courageous spirit inside all of us if we choose to access it. Steen Metz is a child survivor of the Holocaust. He was born in 1935 in Denmark. At the age of 8, Steen and his parents were arrested by the Nazis and taken to Theresienstadt concentration camp. Steen's father died of starvation less than 6 months in the camp, and Steen and his mother spent a total of 18 months in the camp. Out of 15,000 children that passed through the camp, Steen was one of less than 1,500 children that survived. Determined to keep the stories and memories alive, Mr. Metz has made it his life's work to share his experiences with as many people as possible. Since 2012, he has made over 650 presentations and reached over 90,000 people. Please understand how amazing of an opportunity this is. You will be the last generation to hear the stories of Holocaust survivors firsthand. Steen teaches us lessons of a lifetime. He challenges us to explore our own strengths, and he wants us to realize that we have the power to educate and change our world for the better. Students, please help me warmly welcome today's guest teacher, Mr. Steen Metz.
I want to start off by telling you how lucky I am having survived the camp many, many years ago. I'll never forget, some years ago, I spoke to a middle school. An 8th grade student asked me, did I feel lucky or guilty being alive? Maybe I should feel guilty, but I first of all feel lucky. I'm one of the few people, children, that survived. And in many ways, I feel that I'm representing the 6 million Jews, a million of others who perished due to the atrocities committed by Hitler. Today, it's more important than ever before that we never forget the Holocaust. It happened many years ago. People are starting to forget about it. Even worse, there's a rise in anti-Semitism. There's a rise in Holocaust denial. I went to a couple of schools a few weeks ago. 2 of them had swastika signs in the bathrooms. I'm often asked, what's the best way of overcoming anti-Semitism? It's very difficult, but I believe education is the best way. And I want to ask each person in the audience today, we have a big audience and I really appreciate that. Be my ambassador. Talk to at least 4 people. Tell them you know that the Holocaust took place because you had an opportunity to listen to an eyewitness. If every one of you speak to at least 4 people about it, in round numbers we'll reach about 2,000 people. Very important to me that we spread the word to as many people as possible. If I may have the first slide, please. I wrote a book, A Danish Boy in Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt, this is the cover of the book. Theresienstadt is the German name of the camp where I spent 18 long, long months. Reflections of a Holocaust survivor. I brought a copy today, and I'd like to donate it to your library, and I hope some of you will have a chance to read it before you go on summer vacation. There was only one reason why I wrote the book. I wanted to make sure future generations will always remember the Holocaust. On the next slide, I'm showing a map of Denmark. Maybe it looks a little bigger than it actually is. It's about the size of Rhode Island. And I want to go back a long, long time. April the 9th, 1940. I was almost 5 years old. That was a very fatal day in Denmark's history. The evil man Hitler and the Nazis invaded Denmark by land, by sea, and by air. Even though I was only 5 years old, I can still remember, I can still see the planes, German planes flying very low over the roofs. Denmark was not prepared. We had signed, along with 20 other countries in Europe, a non-aggression pact with Hitler. It didn't mean anything. He invaded every one of those countries. There wasn't much of a battle going on in Denmark. Denmark surrendered within the day, and the Germans, or the Nazis, occupied Denmark for the next 5 years. When I look back, I'm kind of surprised. The conditions, the first, say, 3 years, I describe them as relatively, with emphasis on the word relatively normal. The government was able to continue to govern. The king was able to continue to rule. This was not the case in any of the other 20 occupied countries. So why was it different in Denmark? I believe the major reason being that we had some excellent food products, agricultural products, pork, salami, butter, cheese, and so on. We used to export them to Great Britain. Now we were forced to ship them down to Germany. We also fed the Nazi soldiers in Denmark. And I'll never forget, I read a book 2 years ago. The German soldiers said, we just love to be here because we love the Danish food. There may have been other reasons, but minor reasons why conditions were very unique and different in Denmark. At that time, we had about 8,000 Jewish people out of a total population of 4.5 million, most of them living in the northeast around the capital, Copenhagen. On the next picture, I'm showing, it's one of my favorite slides, King Christian X. Can you imagine, he was riding on his horse every single morning. He was in his early 70s. What I like especially about the picture, the Nazi soldiers saluting the king. He doesn't want to have anything to do with him. He's looking straight forward. He hated the Nazis. Notice he's all by himself. Nobody around him. I want to show a picture of a young fellow on the next slide. I don't know by chance any of you recognize him. But if you do, maybe you haven't changed as much as I think I have changed. But, seriously, there's an important reason why I want to share the picture with you. I was 8 years old at the time. My mother, father, and I were on vacation. The more I look at the picture and think back, I'm surprised that we were able to go on vacation. The country, Denmark, was occupied. Nazi soldiers were marching up and down the streets. They were practically on every street corner. And I remember seeing them, bicycle to and from school. They never touched me, they never approached me, but they looked very intimidating, and I tried to avoid them. Unfortunately, the relatively normal conditions came to a sudden halt in the fall of 1943. What happened? Young people, mostly college, university age, they were not very happy that Denmark had surrendered so easily, and they wanted to fight the Nazis. They didn't like the occupation. They managed to get weapons from Sweden. You can see Sweden to the east of Denmark in the creamy color. They started bombing factories, making products for the Germans. They would also bomb rails and rail cars. They even managed to sink the Danish fleet so the Germans couldn't use it. Their major mission was to prevent products from reaching Germany. They were so successful that the German commandant went to the Danish prime minister, gave him an ultimatum: you have to arrest the young people and you have to sentence them to death. There was no way the government would agree to do that. As a result, they resigned, administration took over. And that became the beginning of what we call the final solution, the roundup of the Jewish people in Denmark. Once again, it was different, a unique situation. Leading Nazi officer heard about the arrest date, late September, early October 1943. Speak the words of the Danish Jewish congregation in Copenhagen. About 90 to 95% of the Danish Jews lived in and around Copenhagen. As a result, over the next 2 to 3 weeks, word got around very, very fast. A number of non-Jewish families became what I call upstanders. They stood up for what they thought were right, as opposed to the many bystanders, people that were indifferent and didn't act. It was a dangerous mission people started. They were hiding Jews in their homes, in hospitals, in churches. As a result, about 7,500, 95% of the Danish Jews managed to escape to Sweden. Sweden was a neutral country throughout the Holocaust, and they managed to not only take in the Danish Jews, but also the Norwegian Jews, and they opened their borders. My home was in the middle of the country, all this, the red frame around it, that's where I grew up. We, to my knowledge, had not been alerted. Communication channels were very different in those days. We had to rely on newspapers, radio, and telephone, and the Nazis had cut off the telephone line. As a result, we were among the 5% of the Danish Jews who were arrested. On October 2nd, 1943, early in the morning, there was a pounding on our door. We lived in an apartment on the 3rd floor. My father answered the door. We got about 40 minutes to get ready. Later on, I found out it was a total shock. Not my father and mother, they had not expected it, they had not been alerted, and they didn't expect it after conditions were relatively normal the first 2 years. If we could move forward, slides. Perfect. The truck you see in that picture, this slide, we were driven from our home into a school in the middle of the country, in the middle of the city. It's a picture of 60 Jewish people standing with their suitcases, spent a couple of hours there. And then on the next slide, you see what happened next. Can you imagine spending over 3 days and 3 nights in a cattle car, very similar to the one you see? It was pitch black, no windows, no light. One door was locked from the outside. Obviously, it was impossible to escape. The uncertainty was great. What was going to happen? Would we survive? Where would we be going? A lot of things went through our minds. You can imagine as an 8-year-old, I had trouble understanding exactly what happened. My parents tried to explain. I still remember the frightened faces of the adults. Can you imagine they had to alternate between sitting and standing for well over 3 days and 3 nights? For 4 children about my age, 8, we managed to lie down on the dirty floor. I described the atmosphere as being very, very tense. The smell was getting worse and worse. There were no bathroom facilities. We had to use buckets in the corner. Fortunately, we had brought, all of us, or most of us, had brought some snacks, sandwiches, and so on. And we would share it. The Nazis didn't feed us at all during that long time, and they didn't give us any water. We made one stop. Finally, we got some fresh air, and after a long time, they did give us some water. On the next slide, you'll see us arriving in Theresienstadt. That's the German description, that's the Czech description of the camp. It was located about 40 miles north of Prague, in what was then Czechoslovakia, is the Czech Republic, 550 miles from Denmark. On the next slide, you'll see the train station on the left. It made walking from the train station into the camp. As soon as we arrived, we were ordered to empty our pockets, confiscate jewelry, anything valuable, including cash. My father told me later on that they had encouraged him to believe all other inmates, they're sure you bring money because you'll be able to spend it. Then we were split into groups, adults, men separately, women separately, children 15 years or younger in dormitories, and seniors 65 and over. Somehow, my mother was able to persuade the authorities that I could stay with her the entire time in camp. I was 8 years old at the time. This was most unusual, but it did happen to other people as well. On the next slide, I'm showing an illustration of the loft. Very similar to where my mother and I were staying, maybe 80 or 90 people. My father was staying in a similar place. It was very hot in the summer. I remember scratching myself. My mother had to explain to her 8-year-old son about lice and fleas. It was cold in the winter. We slept on bunk beds, as you can see. And can you imagine being in that horrible place for 18 long months? Anybody 16 years or older had to perform slave labor. That included my father. He was an attorney. He was used to office work, litigating in the courthouse. And suddenly, and it was very unfortunate as far as I'm concerned, he was ordered to perform heavy road work. It was getting colder and colder. It was difficult. The earth was getting harder and harder. Big ditches in. He was wearing an overcoat to keep warm. A young man in the work group told us later on that an officer came over and literally tore the overcoat off his shoulder. You don't work with an overcoat. Easy to say that didn't forget uniform. He was also whipped and kicked when he didn't perform and make some arbitrary numbers that Nazis had scheduled for inmates in the group. My mother told me that he lost 50% of his body weight. He got very little food, and I'll cover that in a few minutes. He went to the infirmary where he spent 2 to 3 months. They had very good doctors and nurses, but they didn't have the medical supplies. My father died of hunger, malnutrition, after less than 6 months in camp. He was 40 years young. He had been married to my mother for less than 10 years. He clearly died of hunger, but the Germans were not going to tell the world that. On the death certificate, they listed that he died of pneumonia. To my knowledge, my mother was not physically abused, but she was mentally abused a number of times. She had many different jobs, long hours. One of them was cleaning floors in a huge factory. They finished the job, and all the dirty water had been assembled in the bucket. An officer came in to see what was going on, saw the bucket, literally kicked the bucket, and the dirty water spread all over the floor, and my mother had to leave. How can one human being treat another human being that way? I can never understand. I was, as I mentioned, 8 years old and had to work. I did some voluntary work. Not much you can do at that age, but I became a messenger, and I would take messages and documents from one German office to the other. I would work a couple hours in the morning, a couple hours in the afternoon. One late afternoon, I would leave German offices, head for the barracks. On the way, I passed the kitchen. I saw some big sacks of raw potatoes at the end of the kitchen. Looked around to make sure nobody was watching. And then I helped myself. Yes, I was stealing 2 raw potatoes, put them in my pocket, and my mother and I would share them later on. We needed all the help we could get. As an example, at breakfast, we would line up and we would get substitute coffee. We would get about half a loaf of bread to share within the family for the whole week and some margarine. In the next slide, you'll see us lining up, probably lined up for maybe up to 30 or 40 minutes. I refer to it as a soup kitchen. We've got potato soup day in and day out, 365 days a year for lunch. At least they called it potato soup. It was boiled water with potato peel. At dinner, we would line up once again. At least at dinner, we would get different kinds of soups. I remember beef, barley, here. About once a week, we would get a special dish, pasta dish, typical German dumplings. How were we able to survive on those meager portions? Can you imagine 35,000 inmates passed away, most of them from hunger, just like my father? I believe the only reason I survived and my mother survived, we started getting packages. Each nation was entitled to get packages from their homeland. There were so many Czechs in the camp. This is not unusual. This is not unusual since the camp was located in Czechoslovakia. And they got packages before anybody. The packages consisted of food, vitamins, and clothing. At least the packages we got them from Denmark and Sweden, and coordinated by the Red Cross. One day my mother is opening a package. It was very heavy and she didn't understand why it was so heavy. No trees in it. The reason it was so heavy, a couple of guards had stolen the good stuff and put 2 bricks at the bottom of the package. And that's why it was so heavy. How anybody can get exact satisfaction out of doing that, I will never understand. I want to give you another example, life in camp. By this time I was 9 years old, I was grown, outgrown my shoes. How would my mother get shoes? She bartered with a Czech lady. The Czech lady got some Danish food, my mother got some new shoes, and I was able to wear them the rest of the time in camp. Being 9 years old at the time, I didn't realize food was very valuable. They told me later on it was like gold. You could get just about anything food. I'm often asked, what did I do in camp the rest of the time? I tried to play with other children, especially some Czech children. We tried to play soccer. We didn't have a real soccer field. We didn't have a real soccer ball. The mothers took some old clothes, tied them together. We would try and kick it around. So one day, the Czech children didn't show up. And on the next picture, next slide, I'm showing what happened to those poor Czech children. 85,000 inmates, 85,000 were deported to extermination camps like Auschwitz, Birkenau, This was by far the biggest. There were a total of 6 extermination camps. When we refer to them as extermination camps, it was like killing centers. They had gas chambers, and most Jewish people died in gas chambers. I never saw my friends again. I'm looking at my watch, and I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. So I'm going to skip the next 2 slides, and I'll go to what I call Happiness Returns. On April the 15th, 1945, after 18 long months in camp, we were liberated, and I mean we, 450 Danish Jews by the white buses. They came from neutral Sweden. You can see the Swedish flags on the side. It was coordinated by Red Cross. Danish and Swedish drivers manned the buses. We had a convoy of about 20. It was a miracle they were able to drive from Sweden all the way through Denmark, Germany, Czechoslovakia, and then back again. I remember we had to stop a number of times because of heavy bombardment. On the next slide, the buses had just passed the border between Germany and Denmark, and look at the welcome we got. Some weeks later, if I may have the next slide, more specifically, on May the 5th, 1945, the Germans in Denmark finally surrendered. May the 5th, Denmark celebrated never before after 5 long years. We tried to celebrate in Sweden, but it wasn't the same. And I have to tell you, I didn't really feel like a free person until I got back to Denmark some weeks later. We went back to my hometown, forever grateful. General Eisenhower and the Allies had defeated the Germans. Can you imagine what would have happened if the Germans had won the war? I certainly wouldn't be here today. There was no schooling, or I should tell you that our apartment had been rented out. We had nowhere to stay. Some good friends took us in. And everybody, friends, acquaintances, school friends, my mother's friends, and so on, couldn't do enough for us, and they helped us out a great deal. I got some private lessons from a teacher. There was no schooling allowed in any concentration camp, but I had some private lessons. I was very, very lucky. I was able to return to the 5th grade, get back to my old classmates. I think if I had ended up maybe in a different school or a different class, it would have been a difficult transition. It was bad enough, especially in the beginning. It used to be a nice little family of 3. Now it's only my mother and I. I graduated from high school some years later, and then from commercial college. And then I wanted to see part of the world, especially when you live in a small country like Denmark. And I was able to join the Danish food company. They did most of their business outside of Denmark. And after special training in Denmark, I went to England, I went to Canada, and I've been in the United States since 1962. I continued to work for the Danish company for a few years. Then I worked for some American companies later on, like CRD and Kraft. And then I retired in 1999. I cannot imagine it would be 24 years next month since I retired. When you get to my age, time flies. And then I compare it to 18 long months spent in the camp, not years. What a contrast. I published my book in April 2011, and I thought that was going to be it. But I started speaking to a middle school where my grandson was, and I didn't know whether I would like it or not. but I thought I could try quite a different presentation than today. And I didn't know, I thought they might fit with their phones, I thought they may talk, but they were very respectful. They were just as engaged as you are today, very, very attentive. And it ended up being the beginning of a new career in education. It's becoming that passion of mine to speak to as many people, especially young people as today, so we can spread the word. Before we start with questions, I just want to show you my last slide. The next slide is a website. If anybody would like more information, background information, look it up. Steen Metz, neverforget.com. I want to finish by telling you one important lesson I believe we learn. Never give up hope. Many people gave up hope in the camp and they didn't make it. My mother was asked many times if she ever gave up hope, and she said no, she couldn't afford to do that with a 9-year-old son. So if there's anything we have learned, all of you are going to have some difficult times, certainly not to the extent what I experienced, but don't give up. Kind to each other. There's too much hate in the world today. Doesn't mean you have to love each other, but certainly respect each other. The direct opposite of the way Hitler treated the Jews and other minorities. And it's time for me to stop, and I look forward, and we should have quite a long time to take your questions. And again, thank you for being so attentive.
What finally allowed you to feel comfortable sharing your experience during the Holocaust?
That's a great question to start us off. I hadn't planned to do it, but I got a lot of inspiration to my very first presentation to about 8th graders, and I talked about it before. And then apparently, a friend of my grandson who went to that school had a friend, and he said the grandpa was awesome. And when I heard that, then I had to start a new career. Thank you for getting us started. Yes?
You were a young boy when you got taken to the concentration camp. Did you fully process what was happening at this time?
No, I didn't fully process what happened. I think I was too young. Quite frankly, even my parents, while my father was alive, I don't think they knew what was going on around the world. I certainly didn't. It wasn't until much later that I heard about all the concentration camps. It was actually a time when I did research on my book, I learned a lot. But as an 8-year-old boy, I didn't really understand what was going on. Sometimes it was difficult for me. Why was I in the camp? Why were other people like my cousin or my friend not in camp? I have to tell you, we were very, very self-centered. We tried to survive. That was obviously our one goal. And that was kind of a long way of answering your question. Thank you.
How did you maintain hope in such horrible times?
It was very difficult to keep hope in the camp. My mother always had a strong will. She was very, very tenacious. And I'd like to think that I inherited some of those. And as I mentioned earlier, if we had given up hope, we might not have made it. I saw other people that gave up hope and they didn't make it. But I give my mother a great deal of credit for not losing that hope. Thank you.
What was your life like for you and your family before you were deported?
What was my life like with my family before we were arrested? I'm very fortunate that I have a lot of happy memories from that time. especially with my father. I remember I learned to bicycle at a very young age. We had to do that in Denmark. We used it as transportation. In this country, we bicycle mostly for hobby, exercise, and so on. And he would be running next to me. I had a stick. He was holding a stick in the back of my bicycle. And he would run, and he had difficulty getting up. I also have fond memories. We always lived in an apartment. We never had garden. We liked flowers. So we had what we call a commune garden we rented. And we would plant seeds, flowers, lettuce, and so on. And then I would harvest, cut the flowers later on, and pick up some radishes. Maybe this was the start to my business career, because not only just didn't give radishes and flowers to my mother, I charged for it. And when I look back, I can't believe I did that. Thank you for asking the question. I appreciate it.
What do you remember from the day you and your parents were arrested by the Nazis?
I remember a few things, even though I was only 8 years old. I remember the uniforms and the guns of the soldiers that came in to our apartment and arrested us. And as I mentioned earlier, they looked very intimidating. I was really frightened. I also remember, and I don't think I mentioned that earlier, that my mother and I were allowed to go down and visit a baker on the ground floor. We knew the baker. He gave us a big sack, bakery products. He also, and I didn't know that at the time, I was told about it later on, he offered to help us escape. Might have been possible because there was in the basement there was a big complex. But there's no way my mother could accept that. My father was up in the apartment and he might have been shot. And then I remember I had to step up to the truck that I showed you in the picture. So those are some of my memories and happy memories before the other. Thank you.
Did you have any other family members besides your father that were killed by the Nazis?
No, my father was the only one. It's very sad. There was one other family in Copenhagen. My family, they were all from Copenhagen. And my father's younger brother, his wife, and his son, was 3 years younger than me. They tried to escape to Sweden, but they were caught and ended up in the camp. But they were also there. And the rest of the family, about 15, all from Copenhagen, managed to escape to Sweden. If you have heard other Holocaust survivors, you find that in most cases they lost their entire family. You were very lucky. It was a very unique situation. Thank you.
Do you have a hard time you're free from the conflict? Yeah?
Did I have a hard time adjusting to life afterwards? It was hard in the beginning, especially because my father wasn't there. And as I mentioned earlier, my mother's friends, my school friends, helped us a great deal. I was very surprised, especially later on when I thought back. I don't remember my school friends or other friends asking very many questions about life in camp. And I think that helped. You'll never forget it. But my mother felt very strongly that we should look forward and not backwards. But I certainly will never forget the terrible time we had in the camp. Thank you.
Did your mother ever try and hide the truth about the
My mother? No, as I remember, she was very honest about it. She did try, and she managed to not tell me about transportation. There were, as I mentioned, 85,000 Jewish people transported to extermination camp. That I heard much later. He was also trying, I should have mentioned that before, of not having people ask me questions about it. She always said no words, ask her, and don't ask me. So she was in many ways trying for me to forget it. As I mentioned earlier, really wanted to. Thank you.
Did you try denying your faith?
I have never denied my faith. On the other hand, I wouldn't go around and say, hey, by the way, I'm Jewish and I was in the concentration camp. But faith was hard to maintain in camp, especially in the beginning. And I remember there was another survivor, I read this book, and he said, maybe we were wondering whether God forgot about it. And he was saying, maybe God was on vacation. But then he said, came back from vacation, and we were in the white bus. Thank you.
So, this question was kind of asked a few times, but how did you yourself mentally cope after the camp, and how did you and your mother help each other? Like, I know you said you had friends and stuff like that, but how did you mentally move on from that, and how long did it take for you to feel better?
As I mentioned, it was difficult in the beginning, especially since my father was not with us. I tried to make the most out of it. And I think the transition, both from a physical and a mental point of view, helped greatly by the support I had from my friends, not only school friends, but friends from the apartment building where we used to live, and were eventually moved back to the smaller apartment. And there was very little anti-Semitism in Denmark. So everyone wanted to help. And you remember the picture I showed you of the white buses reaching Denmark, and it's unbelievable the number of people that wake up. In Poland, as an example, there's a great deal of anti-Semitism. And as a result, I don't know if anybody wanted to get there. Thank you.
During your time in the camp, did you ever given information about the ongoing war, or did you just have to wait until you were liberated from it?
I think the question was, while I was in camp, did I ever get information on what was going on in the world? In the war, no. I don't remember hearing anything. I don't know, but I don't believe my parents heard anything. I had no radio, no newspaper. Maybe there was some rumors printed in the camp by data arriving, but I didn't hear anything. As a matter of fact, we were liberated, I believe, about 3 weeks before the Germans surrendered in Denmark. We had no idea what happened. Thank you.
What are your thoughts about the current rise in anti-Semitism in the United States?
What is my thought about the current rise in anti-Semitism? It's absolutely terrible. And as a person who has been discriminated against, the ultimate form of anti-Semitism, the ultimate form of discrimination, I've been sent to concentration camp with my family, lost my father. And I wish I had a solution for it. If anybody had a solution, I guess it would not be on the right. In many cases, people that are denying, that's even worse, I think, denying that took place. In many cases, there's a connection between anti-Semitism and denying that. And I think it's one of the worst things that happened when you have been discriminated against the way I have it. You can imagine how I feel about people today being discriminated against. Thank you.
Have you ever been back to the camp you were at?
I went back to the camp in 2009. My wife was concerned that I would get nightmares, but I didn't. I basically went back. I wanted to see the camp as a free person. I saw where I played soccer. I saw where we lived. Can you imagine the barracks have been converted to 2,000 apartments, and the people living there must be like a ghost town. And I did research. Some of the information I've been able to use in my book, and I've been able to use in speaking to students like yourselves. And I would go back again, but at my age, I think that would be difficult. But I don't regret going down there. That I did. I would do it all over. Thank you.
Do you have any regrets? If so,
Do I have any? Oh, I only have one regret, mistake. I think that, and I'm not saying that's a disrespect my parents, but that would be my one regret. I remember right after we were liberated, and actually when we moved into a new small apartment, that I told my mother, if this happens again, let's make sure we just wait. Would be the only regret. Thank you.
Did you ever meet up with survivors from the same after the fact?
I met a number of survivors from the same camp. There's many of you know, maybe you have been there to the Holocaust Museum in Skopje. We have a speakers bureau, and I'm one of 50 members on the speakers bureau. And I met 2 or 3 survivors from my camp. I've also been in touch with a couple of Danes who survived. And I didn't mention it earlier, but it's typical for survivors and liberators. We don't talk much about it. And from not talking much about it till today, I think it's been a healthy evolution. Now I cannot talk enough about it. Thank you.
Was your family aware of the Nuremberg laws when the Staffel SS took you?
I don't think so. And offhand, was it Nuremberg? Was that before we got arrested? Was it before we got arrested?
Yes.
Yeah, oh, okay. I was not aware of it. I would be surprised if my parents were aware. Thank you. I'm sorry, but that's the best way I can answer.
How did the Nazis find out who you and your family were and where to find you guys?
I didn't know that for a long, long time. What actually happened, the Nazis go to the office, don't know. They broke into the office, head office, of the Jewish congregation in Copenhagen. And my family, like most Jewish people in Denmark, we were a member of the congregation. And they stole all the records. They had the phone number, they had the addresses, they had the names, and they had everything they needed. As a matter of fact, I feel very ashamed, but for a long time I thought there were some Germans living close by, and I thought they had informed us because they were German. And that was not the case, and I'm really ashamed I thought that way. Thank you.
Have you ever been in a confrontation with the Nazis, and have they showed you mercy or pity or aggression?
No, there was no kindness among any of the Nazi soldiers. I'm not saying that they weren't kind to some people, but I didn't experience it. My parents didn't experience it. Also, when you think about it, it's dangerous. They'll say they had given us some extra food or whatever it might be, showing favor. They would never, they would probably be sent to jail, even worse, one person jail, or worse things could happen to them. So I would doubt very much that many of them showed mercy or thank you.